Hi, welcome to Colorful Creative Watercolors. I'm Laurie, and we are going to do 5 different ways to do wet on wet. And the first thing we're going to start off with is making floral petals. And what I did was I took on my number 2 round brush. I just put a clean water on there, and I'm just dropping that in there and the petal shapes and just painting them in there. Like right now I'm lifting off some of the wetness. I had a little bit too much water. So now I'm going to grab my pigment, and it is a pinkish color, and I'm going to drop that in there as soon as I get that all mixed up. And you'll see how that color will just spread only in the wet areas. That's what I love about wet on wet. I just love how I just say it like dances around. It just dances in that water wash, and just that water just pulls that pigment all around the floral petals. So now I'm just going to go in there, and I want to put a little point on those petals going towards the center of the flower. So you'll watch while I'm doing that. And oops, my camera went off center there. Got to get it back on track. All right, so now what I'm doing is I'm going to do another flower, the same type of flower, just 5 little petals. This one's going to be a little bit smaller. As you can see, my water wasn't quite clean. I didn't rinse my brush off quite well enough, but that's okay because I'm using that same color anyway. So I'm just dropping that in there just like I did before, and then we'll just point out those petals a little bit towards the center like we did with the other one. And then I felt that I had a little bit too much pigment in my, or too much water basically, in my first flower. So I'm going to go and I'm going to lift some of that out. So I'm just going to lift it out a little bit because it got a little too dark for my taste for the way I wanted it to look. So my brush is actually just picking up some of that extra paint. And my brush is, like I said, a number 2 round. It is synthetic hair, so it's not real. So then next, I am going to, you know what? It's been a while since I actually recorded this. So I took some orange paint, some orange pigment. I'm going to make the center of that flower, but I do want some of that orange to kind of blend in with that wash, so it is still kind of doing a wet on wet because look how that water is pulling in that orange paint in towards those petals. And that's fine because that is kind of the look I was going for because I wanted that to spread. So now I'm going to grab some more of the pink, and I want to actually, my petals I feel are, I want them a little closer together. So I'm just grabbing some more of that pigment, and I want to give those flowers a little bit more definition. So I'm going to pull some of that orange mixed with that pink. I'm going to make my petals just a little bit wider because I wasn't happy with the way they looked. So you can just watch and see what I'm doing here. But I am using that same pink paint that I used when I originally dropped in the pigment. And I will do the same for the other little flower. So this kind of just defines that flower a little bit. But you notice that my paint is still wet, or the paint laying on the paper is still a little bit wet. So it's all working together. And I just want to make some of those petals a little bit bigger. So you see while I'm working there, just giving some shadow here and there, just some definition. Just when you're doing your painting, you just pretty much have to judge, yourself, like, does it need more? Doesn't it need more? Your painting is not going to look like my painting. Um, it's just how it is. We all paint a little bit differently. But this is just to give you an idea of how to do the wet on wet floral petals. Please excuse that noise in the background, and it's my computer letting me know that I have email. All right, so I wanted to have a little bit more color in there, so I grabbed some purple. And I just want to have that purple in there just to give one more shade of color to go around that center of that flower. And it just adds a little bit more definition to it. So there we go. I'm going to smooth some of that out a little bit. And my brush at this point is clean. It's actually just damp, just clean and damp. I'm just pulling some of that purple out. And there we go. So our floral petals are finished. But wait, there's more. We can't just have floral petals, we've got to have stems. So I'm just grabbing some green paint, and I'm just going to take a stem, coming down, stem there, add a few leaves, and there we go. But anyway, this first exercise was how to create floral petals using the wet on wet technique. So the next technique we're going to do is we're going to make I'm going to call it a serene landscape. And we are just going to take clean water. And as you can see, I'm just dabbing that water in there. Pretty much maybe like not a square, like a squarey ovally shape. It's hard to tell what I'm actually, for you to see exactly what I made there, but that is wet. So I am grabbing some Van Dyke Brown, and I'm going to, as you can see, watch how this just spreads. Just look at that. I'm just taking my brush, I'm helping it move along a little bit, but it's just blooming out, just creating this beautiful background. I love how this technique works. This is one of my favorite things to paint because it's so simple, so easy to do. And you see how it blooms up and it blooms down, which is exactly what I want it to do. I'm just kind of making a line across there because we're also going to take some cerulean blue, and then we're going to create a little bit of a lake there. See where those trees look like they're reflecting down, but I do want to have some blue in there just to have that lake-like effect. So I'm just dropping that in there, but I'm doing it lightly. And I'm also defining where my shoreline is on my lake. But you still have that reflection coming down from those, what I'm going to call that tree foresty area. So now what I'm doing is I'm lifting up some paint because I want to make that shoreline just a little bit more defined, so you can see where the water meets the shoreline there. And then we're just lifting up some more paint just to give the movement of water. And just lifting paint is super easy. You can see what I'm doing. I'm just taking the tip of my brush and then I'm dragging it just to give that look of water movement. But I love creating these type of landscapes, and it's all done just using wet on wet. And you can see there's some of the shadow from the trees still coming down into the water. It's great. I love that effect. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do some abstract washes, and we're just going to be doing shapes. So again, I'm going to take a wet brush. I'm using the number 2 brush the whole way through these exercises. So I'm just creating, I did a square, and I did a circle, but you'll find out that my circle dries too quickly. But we'll work on the square first. So I've made the square, and then I'm just going to drop in that pigment. So I'm just taking that green pigment, dropping it in, and it's only going to stay wherever I put the wet water. And this is just what I like about wet on wet. It stays within that water, as long as you're on a flat surface. If you were on a tilted surface, yes, it would drip down, but so would your water. But doing it on a flat surface and then just filling in all those areas within your square. But look how that just blooms within there with the different values. And that's what I really like most about of doing wet on wet. And I just noticed my circle dried, so I needed to go back in and create my circle once again. Then I decided, oh, who needs a circle? I'm going to do a triangle. So I'm making a triangle. And it's supposed to have been clean wet water, but I had already had purple on my brush till I realized that it had dried. But now I'm just dropping in that purple in there in that triangle. But the whole point of this exercise is just to basically show you what it looks like when you're doing a wet on wet. Wet paper and a wet paintbrush. So there is my triangle. So we'll have one more shape to create. And that is a square. I'm sorry, my first shape was actually a circle, and I said it was a square. It was a circle. So now we're just going to make the square shape. I'm a little bit mixed up today for some reason. And then once again, we'll add another color in there. We'll make that blue, and we'll make that blue square. But like I said, I just love how that looks and how that blooms. You know, you could even just stop and not even fill the whole thing in and just let some of that white show. You know, that's totally up to you. But these are fun exercises to practice doing shapes, you know, making these different these different types of wet on wet. So there we go. We've got our square. And then we're going to let that dry. And I did a fast dry on here. And you will see here shortly, voila, it's dry. So I'm going to take my Micron pen, and then I'm just going to do some doodles around those shapes. So I'm going to draw some circles around, put some lines in. This is just pretty much abstract painting. You can make patterns. You can do whatever you want. I'm just drawing in some random lines, just random doodling. But just to give you an idea of the different things that you can make when you are doing wet on wet. We'll put some flowers in there. And that'll just be like an abstract painting using wet on wet and a Micron pen. All right, so let's move on to the next thing. We're going to do a salt texture. It's just regular table salt, and we should get up there just about now. So I'm going to do the wet on wet. I'm going to make a wet area. This is clean water. And then I'm going to drop some pigment in there, just like we did with all the other ones. And just so you know, I actually probably wouldn't have needed to do wet on wet for this, but I could have just did it just wet on dry. But since we're doing the wet on wet, I just wanted to show you. So it's all wet. So I'm just taking some plain table salt. I'm dropping it in there. Now this needs to completely dry before you pull the table salt off to see the effect that it gives once it's dry. But just showing you what happens is the salt absorbs the pigment, and then it will create just a beautiful texture underneath. But while that's drying, we're going to do the next thing where we're going to do negative painting. I'm just drawing a circle with my pen. You could use pencil, you could use whatever you want, but I used the pen just so it was dark enough for you to see. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the wet water, and I'm going to go around the circle on the outside. And you're going to use this effect if you, or this technique, if you say you want to create a flower, or you want to create an area where you don't want any paint to be. You want it to stay white. You know, just say you don't have any masking fluid, or you know, you just want that area to stay white. So if you paint around it, you can do the outside of it. And this is why it's called negative painting, because you're going on the outside of the area that you want to preserve the whiteness. And by putting that wet clear water around it first before adding the pigment, it will keep that pigment outside of that area. It will not let it bleed in towards the area where you want it to stay white. So this is what we will call negative painting. So as you see, that pigment is not going in towards the center. Now, on mine, I believe I had water. If you can see there, see how some of that water went down below that line there? That was my error. When I put the original water wash on, I actually had that wet inside there, because if I didn't, the paint would not have gone in there. So while that's drying, we're going to go back to the salt texture, and look, you can already see those little starbursts and those blooms. Now, I didn't wait till it was completely dry. You can see where it scraped there a little bit, but that's okay. But you can still see where those little starbursts come. So this is great for like a snow or a starry sky, or wherever you just want a different texture on your texture effect on your watercolor painting. So I do love using salt in watercolor. It is fun. But like I said, I mostly use it for snow or starry skies. But there's other things you can use it for. When you're doing your abstract painting, you could pour some salt on your abstract painting, and you can give a nice different texture there as well. All right, so as we're watching for that to dry there a little bit more, because I will eventually then scrape that off. And that's all you need to do. Once it's completely dry, all you need to do is just use your fingers and swipe that off. So let's go back down here and look. I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix this little area here where it kind of got into the negative space. So I'm just lifting the paint. It is a damp, clean brush, and see how I'm just wiggling back and forth, and I'm just lifting that paint off. Now I'm just going to keep going until that paint disappears. And that's just the beauty of watercolor. When you have a, what we say, is it a happy accident? No, because if I really wanted that space to be completely white, I would have been a little upset about it. But as you can see, I can lift that paint right up with a damp, clean brush. And after you do several swipes, you want to wipe that brush off because you don't want to keep pushing around that same color pigment. So you can see I was able to fix that. And the reason it's a little discolored there, that's just because it's wet. It's damp. But the paint still stayed. So now I believe that is dry enough, and we're just going to, what I'm doing is I'm just brushing off that salt. Now you can see where my big boo-boo is there, where I already did it before it was dry. But that's okay, I'm not mad about it, because look at those different textures. Look at those little starbursts. I just think it's a great effect or a technique to use. And so there you have it, the 5 different ways that you can use wet on wet watercolor technique. So I'm so glad you joined me for this today. And please join me at colorfulcreativewatercolors.com, and you can join my Facebook group, Watercolor Tutorials and Inspiration. Go ahead and look me up. But remember, stay colorful, stay creative, and have fun. Bye-bye.